The views expressed on this podcast are ours alone and do not reflect the views of our employers.
Evolution of evil.
I'd have the sleeping pill mixture already prepared. Person would drink it, fall asleep. That's when they would be strangled.
Do you have a boyfriend?
No.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
Evil is not spurned. Evil is thought of as a spirit that needs help.
Believe me, if I started murdering people, there'd be none of you left.
Evolution of evil.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the True Crime Podcast, Evolution of Evil, the show where we relive some of the most horrific incidents in people while dissecting the brain of those people. Please remember to subscribe and rate this podcast wherever you get your podcast. Follow the show on Twitter at Evolution of EVI2, as well as our personal accounts, Justin at Justin Yent. That's him. I'm at T Stevens 91. Before we get started with your topic this week, Justin, which is a great one, first tell us what the topic is.
This week we are covering The Angel of Death, Capturing the Killer Nurse on Netflix. It's a great documentary.
And I wanted to get that out of the way first because at the end of last week's show, you told everyone you didn't know you were covering yet. And this is a dandy. So we're gonna start there. But some things from last week. The episode of Our Father that I covered with Dr. Donald Klein, that dirtbag from Indianapolis. Miss Amy, who at this point, I mean, she might as well be the third person on the show. She writes in, "Love the episode on Our Father. I saw where two people discovered they were part of Dr. Klein's family after the Netflix documentary." So if you remember, I actually mentioned the end of the documentary number, and the number I had was bigger because they've discovered a few more since the documentary come out. Do you know if there has been more? As of this moment, I believe the standing number is 98, which again is bananas. I hope there is more exploration of the accidental death of the child he hit with his car and the Quiverful relationship, because you can see where he could have been vulnerable and Quiverful jumped on that, or he discovered them to somehow and turned it into his mind that he was doing a good thing. So I don't know. I could do that very quickly. Look up when Quiverful became a thing. I doubt they were around when he, had the vehicular manslaughter incident in 1963. I could be wrong. But this is the thing, right? So let's say that was the case. And I don't know that it is. Let's say it was. Well, actually, Quiverful doesn't have to be involved in this. So what had happened was this incident happens. Dr. Klein has some sort of a pre-deposition or whatever phrase you want to use to make up for this incident. So, and you're never going to make up for it. I don't care what you do. It just isn't going to happen. But there's things you can do to at least make some good of the situation. And he chose none of those and went, hey, I'm just going to rape people without actually raping them. So that's what happened, right? You try to fill the void, but again, you have no social conscience, so you don't direct yourself in an actual positive way. You're just like, hey, I'm going to artificially inseminate a bunch of women with my sperm. However, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sad part was he blamed it on having a moral compass and blamed it on his religion, So the nice thing was, I always love Amy when she messages us. She does research further when we have conversations with her. So she also said that there are 40 other doctors who did the same thing that he did with the Quiverful. So I don't know as far as the whole insemination part, but it looks like they were trying to build an Aryan nation, just like Dr. Klein was. So I just love the fact that she comes to us not only with questions, but also some answers and some research on her own.
Yes. So doing some very cursory Googling right now while Justin was talking. I was listening though. It appears the first publishings of Quiverful, actually, let me rephrase that. The Lambeth Conference issued a statement on birth control. That was in 1930. So it appears the first book that was written that popularized Quiverful was a book called The Way Home by Mary Pride. And it's so weird how they, again, because the title is The Way Home, Beyond Feminism and Back to Reality. So how that book led to Quiverful, I will never understand. I haven't read it, to be fair. But that book was written in 1977. So, I mean, it was around shortly thereafter, but and it's possible, again, there's references to the 30s, so it's possible. And she ends it with, however, that doesn't explain the other 40 some odd doctors who did the same thing. Please do updates on this story. There's bound to be some. So, funny you mentioned that. I was just telling Justin before the show, I have emailed Jacoba Ballard about coming on this show because she has since become a infertility patient advocate, the fact that it took this long and something like that to happen for this to be a thing, infertility patient rights, is bananas to me. But that's what I'm hoping to get her on so we can continue and tell the story of her siblings and whatnot. So, Amy, I am working on it. Hang in there. Thank you for the DM there on the follow-up.
Yeah, I was surprised that was just a one-show pony when it came to the documentary, right? And it kind of leads me into what we talked about this week, which was an hour-and-a-half documentary as well. It's surprising how they pick and choose which ones get multiple episodes and which ones just get an hour-and-a-half documentary. So definitely interesting.
You are covering, quite possibly, again, if the alleged number is correct, this wouldn't just make him the most prolific serial killer in the United States. It'd make him the most prolific serial killer ever in the world. You are doing, I'm on the wrong paragraph, Charles Cullen, the nurse.
Yes. And
take us away.
TJ, I think I'm just looking at your episodes and saying, I see your episode and I raise you several.
Yeah, no doubt.
So basically,
see, in tandem, he takes him away. Dr. Klein gives him back.
Exactly. TJ, we talked about Dr. Death, Harold Shipman, in episode 4. Here we're talking about a killer nurse in episode 8. At least we're sticking to the medical field in the last couple episodes.
Yes.
Often referred to as the Angel of Death, Netflix recently published a documentary on Charles Cullen, who we will be covering in this episode. It's amazing, while watching the documentary and researching Cullen, I was able to see a lot of similarities to Shipman and his life. So the documentary, Capturing the Killer Nurse, on Netflix, is an hour-and-a-half true crime documentary that explores the case of Charles Cullen, a registered ICU nurse that was responsible for the deaths of an estimated 40 to 400 patients over a period of 16 years. Now, this documentary attempts to provide a comprehensive, in-depth analysis of the case, examining the background and psychology of the killer, the investigation and the legal proceedings that led to his arrest and conviction, and the impact of his crimes on the victims' families and the healthcare industry as a whole. As we normally do, let's get to know Charles Cullen more before we dive into his crimes and the documentary. So TJ, Charles Cullen was born on February 22nd, 1960 in West Orange, New Jersey. He grew up in a dysfunctional family with an abusive father who died when he was just an infant, and a mother who suffered from mental illness. Sound familiar? He was the youngest of 8 children, and when asked to describe his childhood, Cullen often described it as miserable. Now, this is how you can tell that it was miserable. Before the age of 10, he had already tried to take his own life. That was the first of 20 attempts, according to Cullen. So, like Dr. Death, Cullen was unusually close to his mother and also lost her at the young age of 17. Due to the death of his mother, he decided to drop out of high school and enlist in the Navy. He was discharged from the Navy for attempting suicide and having mental instability. He attended Mountainside Hospital College of Nursing. Now, how, after being discharged for mental instability, I have no clue. But he earned a degree in nursing in 1987. He would then go on to meet and marry Adrienne Taub, who he would then have 2 daughters with. They would later divorce in 1993. He worked in several hospitals and healthcare facilities in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, including St. Barnabas Medical Center, Warren Hospital, and Somerset Medical Center. TJ, we keep finding more and more of these evildoers that have family, something to live for, and they keep pissing it away due to being absolutely evil inside. And that it's not even enough for them.
It is interesting, and again, we need to stress this. Is this across the board? No. There are outliers with anything else. I mean, that's just the way it is. But you know what's interesting? I just realized this when you were discussing his early life and his upbringing and things like that. We never heard the family situation of Dr. Klein. And you know, we've brought this up before. It wasn't last week, it was the week before, about why I went on a mini tirade about it, actually, why documentaries like this one should be series and not an hour and a half feature. And if I guarantee if you go and ask the producers, why was this not a series and why is it an hour and a half feature instead? They would all say we didn't have enough material to run, a series. We had to do an hour and a half. My issue with the hour and a half features is you don't have enough time to cover the victims. All you have the time to do is cover the crimes. And the victims here in this instance with this man's profession and how he did everything, it's probably more important here, the victims, than any other story we've done to this point, which is why this needs to be a series, because you can discuss the victims, their impact on the community, the impact of the families, and just really how depraved what Charles Cullen was doing, because we get an idea of it, but really it's not till the very end of the documentary they go to the trial, you get a glimpse of it, and that's minimal. So that's my soapbox for this week.
No, and I get you, and it's funny because you say, hey, why did they leave out this? They had 20 years to come up with material.
Yeah.
So 2003 was when he got caught, right?
Yes.
They published this in 2023. They previously had a movie about it on Netflix called The Good Nurse.
Mm-hmm.
So they had already produced a movie about the same situation.
Yeah.
They just decided, hey, let's make some more money off of it and film a documentary.
Netflix.
Yeah.
That's their slogan.
Exactly. For $19.99 a month, we can go ahead and take your money and show you multiple viewpoints of the same case.
Yeah.
Anyway, so let's dive deeper into his nursing career. Cullen's nursing career was marked by a series of suspicious incidents and complaints from colleagues and supervisors. I'll go into a little bit more specifics of that a little bit later, but he was known for his erratic behavior, poor performance, and frequent absences. He also had a history of drug abuse and mental health issues. So it carried over from the Navy. It just didn't stop after that. He managed to evade detection and continue working in different hospitals and facilities. His crimes went undetected for many years, in part because he worked at different hospitals and healthcare facilities and was able to move from job to job without raising suspicion. Sound familiar, TJ? Let's talk about the first time Cullen could have been caught.
I think what's upsetting to me about this one is I didn't realize the hospital industry, much like police forces in the 80s, were so similar, and they didn't talk to each other. because he could have been caught several times.
Yeah.
They just don't talk to each other. It's bananas to me.
Yeah, I think we're gonna not skip to the first time. I think let's talk about the first time or the last time where he got caught, and then we'll flash back. It wasn't until 2003 that Charles Cullen's crimes were discovered. He was working at Somerset Medical Center at the time, where he was caught injecting a lethal dose of insulin into a patient's IV bag, which was observed and reported by a coworker and friend, Amy. Not our listener, Amy. We will talk more about her and their relationship later. Now, the patient survived, but the incident triggered an investigation that revealed a pattern of suspicious deaths and medication errors in several hospitals where Cullen had worked. What I found completely odd in the documentary is that the coworker reported the issue to the authorities, law enforcement, and the hospital did nothing. So this floored me. They had a medical professional working in a hospital with critical patients and still has access to lethal doses of medication, and they're allowing him to continue to work while they investigated him. As someone who works in a professional setting, I've seen many peers within my industry put on administrative leave while the powers that be investigate to ensure that no crimes are being done. These careers that I'm referring to have nowhere near the life and death consequences that Cullen's job did. So why would they not discuss their theory with either the police to have them actually look into it, or request that they put him on administrative leave until they're able to clear him or prove his guilt? Well, yes, this would have given him the idea that ultimately someone was onto him. It would have potentially prevented any further fatal deaths at the hands of Cullen. TJ, if you were a patient at the hospital and you found out that anyone knew about Cullen for over a week or any time, and at this point I think it was 3 months, and allowed him to continue to work there and specifically work on you, what would your thoughts be?
So there's a lot to unpack in this paragraph you just did. And first of all, I would punch everyone in the dick that came close to me if I was in that hospital. But the first thing is, and I don't know if you're going to get into this, so if you are, excuse me. But one of the biggest reasons why nothing happened, and you find this out later through Amy, who we'll discuss, is the hospital was trying to secure and keep funds for a campus they were in the process of building. So they were waiting to get a new facility. That's why all this got swept under the rug.
So that's actually a different hospital, and we will talk about that later.
But that was a different one?
Yeah, so what it was is
Heavens.
They just couldn't figure out what was going on. They were talking about it behind the scenes and really just thought something else wasn't really happening. Yeah. So yeah, it was a different hospital, and we'll talk about that later.
But I mean, really, no one did anything about this until this nurse, Amy. Essentially, again, they're best friends, but she suspects something because she stood up for him once for something. Then that's when she got suspicious because he tried to give. You're probably going to cover it, so I'll leave it alone. But she was printing off documents that essentially implicated him. And that's what really spurred this whole thing.
Yeah. So let's go back to where he could have been caught originally, right? So September 1991, Helen Dean went in for a procedure at Warren Hospital, and it went well. Doctors had advised her son, Larry, that they were going to send her for a rehab to the Coventry and allow her to heal and rest. Larry was extremely close to his mom and was adamant about not leaving her side to ensure she was okay and she had everything that she needed. During the stay, a male nurse, I'll give you one guess who it was, comes in and asks Larry to exit the room and then draws the curtain around Helen. While near the room, I think they describe it as at the nurse's station, Larry could hear his mother yelp and scream and immediately ran in the room to see what happened. While he was heading in, the male nurse, who happened to be Cullen, was hightailing it out of the room. Larry immediately asked his mom what happened, and she said he stuck her with a needle. Sure enough, he was able to see a prick mark on her interior right thigh. Later that afternoon, they came to transport her to the rehab. Helen asked Larry to stop by the house and grab her slippers and bring them with him to the rehab. Not sooner than he arrived to the house, he received a call from the rehab center basically stating Helen had passed away about 5 minutes after arriving at their location. Larry didn't wait, and it reminded me of the whole Dr. Death thing about what kind of almost, or what brought him to his knees. This one didn't bring Cullen to his knees. Larry didn't wait. He went directly to the local prosecutor's office and reported his mother's death as a murder and blamed the male nurse as the prime suspect and let them know what had happened earlier in that day. Now, the local prosecutor took Larry's claim completely serious and made sure to order a toxicology report on Helen to see what drugs could be in her system. He ran it on all the drugs except for one, dioxin. Now, you're probably wondering what the hell is that? For those unaware, dioxin is a drug used to treat irregular heartbeats. If they were to have tested for everything, they may have caught this guy back in 1991, stopped him from committing any further crimes. We may not be talking about 400 people at this point. It may be a lot fewer. But they didn't, and many more victims ultimately paid the price with their life. Now, let's flash forward 8 more years. And in April 1999, they could have caught him again. Cullen then moved to St. Luke's Hospital. Now, TJ, this is the story that you were talking about. This is another hospital that should have been able to see the red flags. Report Cullen to the authorities and prevent so many beautiful lives from ending so shortly. Pat Medellin, a fellow nurse who worked with Cullen in June of 2002, describes the night that Cullen was escorted out of the hospital and the rumors that were swirling due to it. Basically, more than 50 vials of medicine were discarded in the needle box that were either used or unused. With that, her mind went into overdrive. She had 2 patients within the month prior that had coded previously that nobody expected. She then went further and investigated all the unexplained deaths that had happened lately. There ended up being 67 unexplained deaths. She figured statistically it wasn't possible for Cullen to be on duty or involved in all of those. So, statistically speaking, she thought she'd give him about 17 that he would have been on shift for. Believe it or not, TJ, she actually found 40 that he was on duty for. One of the ones included in that 40 was Samuel Spangler, who was about 80 years old. Now, she reached out to her director and reported to Charlie to them and pretty much accused him of murdering his patients. They denied it right there and then, said they had already investigated it and kind of swept it under the rug. Right there, she was already going, something's not right. Okay, so I've told them my suspicions. They're already telling me they've already investigated it. Something's not sitting right with me, right? So she just happened to have a friend who was in law enforcement, and she called them and explained it on their way home. Basically, she laid everything out and turned everything over to the state police. She was later told by the CEO of the hospital, along with the rest of her hospital coworkers, that the investigation had not turned over anything. Mysteriously, the hospital was looking to expand to another campus and had an application in for an additional funding and bond, which would have disqualified them if something like this had leaked. With that, it was easier to look the other way instead of taking care of it. What a piece of shit move from probably a government-backed hospital.
You know, it's this is one of those things where you're like, your whole life you think to yourself, surely this institution, whether it be the medical field or law enforcement or whatever the case is, has my back. They'll protect me. And then you find out they're just like anything else. When there's a large amount of money involved in a new shiny facility and things like that, they couldn't give a rat's ass about you. And 67. 67 people died, and they couldn't have given a shit. Like, they just didn't care. Full steam ahead. Didn't find anything. Just keep your mouth shut. It's crazy to me.
But the 50 needles that they found were the reason to walk him out, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, that's theft. That's
not,
different.
Not the 40 people that potentially he could have killed.
Yeah, that's theft. That's entirely different.
Oh, murder is just nothing, though. It's crazy to think of it. Like, greed just completely outweighs everything. So,
underlying theme of a lot of our shows too.
Exactly. I promise you, we don't map this out beforehand. Like, hey, what's everything got in common? Nope, It just happens to completely help itself.
Well, when you're doing a show that with this theme of true crime, a lot of the same themes is what I was just trying to say. Same themes pop their ugly heads up time and time again, because there's really only 4 things that causes all this stuff. And this one is Cullen's warped view of what he was trying to do, and greed. That's all there is. That's it.
Now, TJ, I mentioned earlier that it was his coworker Amy that turned him in, right?
Yes.
So let me explain further. Amy, Cullen, and his other female nurse, Donna, all 3 were a tight group of coworkers at Somerset Medical Center. They often worked the ICU together, so they were like 3 amigos, the 3 musketeers. They really had a good time. Amy described it as almost friends that could really read each other's minds when it came to, like, they could look at each other and know what the other one was thinking. So they'd worked together for a while. One night, Amy had some issues with her blood pressure and almost passed out while on shift. Cullen was able to ensure no one saw her almost pass out and actually took her to another room. It was there that she actually confided in him that she had cardiomyopathy and was not disclosing it to her employer or anyone else for fear that she'd lose her job or not be allowed to work. I personally got diagnosed with cardiomyopathy in 2018, so I understand kind of what she was fearing. It's close to, like, you can lose your life pretty much. You can just drop dead like that. So she was really having to struggle with a lot mentally there, and to trust him with that information, it's huge, right? So ultimately, she was still lightheaded, and Cullen encouraged her to go seek treatment in the ER to at least be checked out. Once again, she refused, but still needed help. He told her to stay put and came back with liquid medication for her that helped her. Basically, that's when one of the red flags came up. So, as much as she was grateful, she kind of questioned where he got the medication. In addition to that, he worked all of her patients that night and did all of her charts. And more importantly, he kept her secret. So, for that, like I said, she was grateful. Now, fast forward, we have Reverend Florian J. Gall, who was 68 years old. He was admitted to the hospital on March 2003 due to heart issues and had to be intubated. He was at Somerset for a while. Like Larry was with his mother earlier, the Reverend sister was at his bedside often. He was moved eventually as he progressed to getting better from the ICU to the CCU, which is a critical care unit, due to his improving health, and his sister left for the night one night. He coded that night and died on June 28th, 2003. Amy was shocked to find out that he had coded and passed, as she felt his health was improving and could not understand what had happened. She reached out to the New Jersey Poison Control Center and reported to them that dioxygen was found in the Reverend, and he had a high toxicity level. Now, the weird part is they had given him dioxygen 2 days prior, and his toxicity levels were high of the same drug, which should have already worn off. So that was kind of a red flag for her of, hey, his levels of this drug should have been completely gone by now. It's almost as if we just gave him a new dose of it and a lethal dose of it. So on the 28th, in the same unit, they had another fatal toxicity. The poison control specialist then asked Amy if there was anything else unusual happening at the hospital that she knew about. Maybe some patients that were hypoglycemic. She confirmed yes. There were a few previously. So at that point, Amy was then advised to get law enforcement involved. TJ, this is June 28th, 2003. That's an important date to remember.
Yes.
Okay. So the executive director of the New Jersey Poison Information and Education System warned Somerset Medical Center officials in July 2003 that at least 4 of the suspicious overdoses indicated the possibility that an employee was killing patients. But the hospital put off contacting authorities until October. By then, Cullen had killed another 5 patients and attempted to kill a 6th.
Let's also keep this in mind too. So you just mentioned that he just killed 2 in a day, or was he successful in the second one? I think he was.
Oh yeah.
So what that tells me is not only is he still doing it, obviously he's spiraling out of control because he wasn't doing 2 a day before this. He probably took a month or 2 off because he knew the heat was on him, and then started right back up. And as you're about to discuss, which again, how is this possible? He ends up getting fired, and you'd think, well, thank you, Mr. Cullen, for your terrible input on the world of medicine, but you'd be terribly wrong. Somehow, this man gets a second. Tim Tebow couldn't get another crack at being the starting quarterback in the NFL, but this man's like, I'm just going to walk into this hospital and start nursing, and they let him. It's crazy.
Yep. So they finally fired him on October 31st, 2003 for lying on his job application and reported him to the law enforcement. I'm kind of moving up in notes real quick because I missed a section specifically because I wrote it out of order. That's what you get for writing notes at midnight.
Yeah, don't do that. But also, that's an important sentence you just said. Did he get fired for mysteriously handling medications or losing patients? Nope. He lied on his application. That's why he got canned. Now, granted, all of this was so they could get rid of him because he was killing people. But he lied on his job application. That's why he got terminated. Not because he lost 6 patients in 7 months, 2 of which were in a day.
Exactly.
What are we doing?
So while they were investigating Cullen, they were able to determine that he had a history of abusing family pets and actually poisoned a family pet at one time. Also, according to the divorce papers and domestic violence complaints from his wife in 1993, they depicted Cullen as an alcoholic, someone who abused pets by placing them in bowling bags and trash cans, poured lighter fluid into other people's drinks, and made prank calls to funeral homes. So it is during that investigation that they actually found out about what happened at Warren Hospital to Helen Dean. So they're just building a case, right? And really it's just struggling to go, how did this guy continue to get away with it? And how was everything just not reported to us? Or how did he get so lucky to not get caught, right? Ultimately, they kept him under surveillance for several weeks until they had finished their investigation. They felt they had enough evidence, but they wanted to go ahead and make sure that they had everything on him. Amy would come back into play as law enforcement asked her to wear a wire and help them get Cullen to confess. In the documentary, I thought it was pretty interesting that the two investigators actually interview all of the nurses in there, and they see a pattern of Amy's name in a lot of the notes, right? The I don't remember if it's Amy's boss or if it's the HR person for the hospital. But either way, they coach her prior to going into the investigation and basically say, this is what you need to say. This is kind of how to say it. What pretty much coach her on how to say things. Amy thought it was bullshit at the time. She pretty much thought, Charles was fired incorrectly. Really, this is her friend, so she's standing up for her. Basically, she goes into the room. The two investigators are talking to her. The boss or the HR person then leaves the room. This is the first time she leaves the room. Amy can't figure out why she left. But luckily for the investigators, she left because then they were able to say, hey, see this paper here? This is all the times that your friend Charles went into the medical room and checked out all the medicine. And so basically, that's all it took for her to turn on our friend and say, yep, he's a creep.
So we should also specify, she didn't just turn on him. She was faced with irrefutable proof that this is what he was doing. And it's, again, so every one of these stories, for the most part, has a hero. Amy's the hero in this. Because now that she's agreed to the investigation, she's going to help. She has everything to lose. She can get fired from the hospital for pursuing an investigation they've deemed unnecessary. What if he spills the beans about her cardiomyopathy? She everything to lose here, and she does it anyway, including the wire, which almost became a situation in itself. I'm sure you're going to cover that. This woman's incredible, and I wish we could talk about her more.
Yeah, I may pull you in to talk about that wire. So basically, she did set up a lunch date with Cullen where ultimately she flat out told him she knew what he was doing, that she was still here for him as a friend. Amy then stated in an article with the UK Independent, when I told him I knew he had done those things, I watched him sit up. His posture changed. He moved his head to the side. He settled in, and he was very smug. Surprise, huh? An evil piece of crap being smug when caught. It floors me. Like, no conscience, not, I'm apologetic. Even when, like, they interviewed him, basically he said, I wanted to quit as a nurse, but basically the child support that I owed my wife for my two kids forced me to continue to work. Didn't make you continue to kill. So that's where I call bullshit on that.
Well, it's also too. I was just watching the interview tapes of John Wayne Gacy for like the 30th time because Gacy fascinates me. But he says the last thing he says before they kill him is, "I killed 33 times. They can only kill me once." Gacy outsmarts him again, and that's. It's impossible because our brains would never go to that place. That's how he thinks, right? And now, mind you, he denied it up until the end, and then he essentially admits it by saying that. But the Wire story. So she goes into this bar they used to go to all the time when they worked together. It was the first time they'd gotten together since he was fired and went wherever else. And this is 2003, so technology was better, but it still wasn't great. So she's got a black box clipped to the back of her, the waistband of her pants on the back. And she said when they reached in and hugged, he almost touched it. And that would have been, who knows what would have happened, if that little mishap would have happened. But yeah, it almost became a situation, but luckily he missed it and essentially admitted everything.
Just, it's amazing the courage people have to make sure that they're doing the right thing. So I'm glad that she had a moral compass at the through everything. So
Oh, and it wasn't Amy, but it was the other nurse, the first one that initially reported everything and talked to her investigator friend in the car.
Mhm.
She had said that there were rumors around the hospital when she first made her complaint that, whatever nurse did this is going to cost us our new hospital.
yeah,
Which again, what? People are dying and there's possibly one person responsible, and you're worried about the new facility. You're a nurse. You're killing me, Smalls. Like, this is, I don't understand.
before anything else, do no harm.
Yes.
So, well, the good news is he was finally arrested on December 14th, 2003, and charged with murder of Reverend Gall and an attempted murder of Jin Kyung Han, who was 40 at the time. Those were his first two confessions. Flash forward to November 2004. Something was eating at his soul, TJ, as he confessed to killing 6 patients and attempting to kill 3 others as he pleaded guilty in court in Pennsylvania. Now, further down the road in July 2005, he pleaded guilty in New Jersey and was sentenced to 11 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Now, this was increased to from 11 to 18 life sentences in March of 2006 as more victims were acknowledged in different counties. 18 life sentences. He just screwed over 17 other people that come back as him. It's awful.
That was a good joke. Thank you.
Well, I heard it from someone. So he admitted to killing patients by injecting them with lethal doses of medication errors in several hospitals where Cullen worked. He admitted to killing patients by injecting them with lethal doses of medication, including insulin, dioxin, and epinephrine. Now, we talked about what dioxin is for, and I'm assuming everybody knows what insulin is, but epinephrine is used to treat severe allergic reactions, usually referred to as an EpiPen, pretty much. Both, if used correctly, are not as fatal, but Cullen was using it at lethal doses. Now, TJ, I'm pretty sure you're probably wondering what the motives behind Cullen was.
Absolutely.
Yep, it still remains unclear. Some experts believe that he was motivated by a desire to relieve the suffering of terminally ill, or to gain a sense of power and control over life and death. Others suggest that he may have been seeking attention or trying to cover up medical errors or mistakes. Charles Cullen himself has given conflicting and vague explanations for his actions, making it difficult to understand his psychology and motives. Now, really, I think it boils down to he was just an evil turd that really just wanted it to hurt people. He had several chances to change and stop what he was doing.
Well, I mean, one of the investigators say that, the common theme of the story being told about him really until now has been he was an angel of death in the classic sense of the word or the phrase, meaning he was taking people he thought to be suffering and ending it. And that would be, I guess, somewhat understandable until you realize that over half of his half of his kills were either on the road to recovery or about to be discharged. So no, that's not what it was.
Yeah, poor Helen. Here she is, like, getting out of the hospital, going to rehab, and he kills her right before she gets to rehab. 5 minutes into rehab, she's dead.
And I mean, it would even be more acceptable and maybe satisfying to the human reading this, to the person reading this, if, like Dr. Shipman, he was forging wills and that was why. But it isn't.
Yeah.
There is no reason why he was doing what he was doing.
Yep. I think it just boils down to he was a human turd, pretty much. Basically, the impact of Charles Cullen's crimes was devastating for his victims and their families, as well as for the healthcare industry and nursing profession. Many families of the victims have filed lawsuits against the hospitals and healthcare facilities, as they should, where Cullen actually worked, alleging negligence and failure to protect their loved ones. The case has also raised questions about the effectiveness of background checks, drug testing, and supervision of healthcare workers. I'm going to pause right here. So I would assume that if they actually did a background check, they would have caught the mental instability that
Mhm.
actually discharged him from the Navy.
Yes.
I have never served and had the pleasure of serving in our armed forces, but I would assume that stuff is not like locked up in secret.
No.
Like the reason you're discharged is very public,
Yes.
correct?
It's
Okay.
on your discharge orders. Yes.
Okay. So I would assume they would have caught that at every hospital that he applied for.
They would have caught it at McDonald's.
Okay. Well, I'm glad McDonald's has a better background check than the med school
I
and the
guess.
3 hospitals that he
Yeah.
worked at. Now, his case has sparked debates about the death penalty, mental health treatment, and the need for stricter regulations in the healthcare industry. The reason for the death penalty is he got to say his piece that he didn't want the death penalty, and they
Right.
allowed him to have 18 life sentences
Stupid.
without parole.
I'm glad we know what his feelings are about it.
Yes, yes. I'm glad that actually got taken into consideration since none of his victims got to choose whether they lived or died.
Jackass.
Yep. Anyway, TJ, the legal ramifications are huge. So, previously on an episode, we discussed that Belle Guinness was able to get away with what she did, mostly due to the lack of communication at the time between cities, etc.
Plus, it was 1907. So
Yeah, I couldn't remember if it was another episode we talked about that either, right?
Eileen, we came up with Eileen Warnos because the different counties of Florida
That's right.
that don't speak. So yeah, it's the same principle though.
Yeah, in Florida, we try not to talk to other counties. So, still today.
I completely get it.
Yeah, but same can be said for this winner. The reason he was able to continue to get away with what he was doing was that the hospitals that he worked for were not communicating at all. Per murderpedia.com, Cullen was largely able to move from facility to facility undetected, experts say, because of lacking reporting requirements and inadequate legal protection for employers. New Jersey and Pennsylvania specifically, like most states, required healthcare facilities to report suspicious deaths only in the most egregious cases, and penalties for failing to report incidents were minor. Now, many states did not give investigators the legal authority to discover where the worker had previously been employed, so employers feared to investigate incidents or give a bad employment reference for fear that such actions may trigger a lawsuit. Again, we're caring about our reputation instead of the patients or the family of the patients that are suffering a loss.
But we shouldn't be surprised because this is the same mindset that companies that negatively impact the environment have. They do as little as they can possibly get away with while still passing EPA regulations, and the EPA has been stripped down to next to nothing in the last decade or more. They're going to do as little as they can possibly get away with because A, it's cheap. Let's be clear on that one. It's cheap, more money for them, and B, they don't want the negative press. Now, again, you would think the medical community would hold themselves to a higher standard. But as you just pointed out, this is our 8th story. 3 of them have been in the medical field. And just because of that, I've changed up my topic next week. I'm doing Dr. Kevorkian. Not really, but that would be great if I did. And I mean, Dr. Kevorkian, Dr. Jack Shepard, there's dozens of these. And again, you would love to think like, well, now it's 2023. Certainly. We're out of the woods. I guarantee you in the next 10 years, there's going to be another one.
Yeah, I will repeat what we've said in previous episodes. There are bad people in many different professions.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, there seems to be bad people in healthcare, which puts a bad taste in your mouth, right?
Well, think about it. If this is what your mind is set to do, right? You want to harm, hurt, or kill other people. What better way to do it than to be in the medical profession where A, you know how to do it, and B, you know how to cover your tracks.
Exactly. And my doctor wonders why I have white coat syndrome. Basically, I will say this, though. If we continue to cover the medical professions, we're just going to change our podcast name to The Doctor Is In.
Absolutely.
So,
I think we should. I think we should. Anyway.
Yeah. You don't realize that as much as we're dry on this podcast, TJ and I are actually pretty funny guys in real
Mm.
life. And so to hold back some of the humor that we actually want to use in some
Yeah.
of the shows, it's really hard.
Well,
So
it's we also have enough of a conscience to understand some of the stuff is not appropriate for the show, so we just don't say it. And we don't do T-shirts yet,
yeah.
but I would say if we're going to have T-shirts, a T-shirt that says "The Doctor is in" would be a phenomenal start.
Yeah. But definitely let's head back to the Angel of Death. So the good news is that since the Angel of Death was caught in New Jersey, ultimately New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and 35 other states have gotten tougher with their laws. So while I was researching on Murderpedia, many of the laws passed in 2004 and 2005 after this Angel of Death case. They have strengthened their disclosure requirements for healthcare facilities, bolstered their legal protections for healthcare facilities that report improper patient care, and they now require licensed healthcare professionals to undergo criminal background checks and actually be fingerprinted at their own cost. So pretty much they do the same thing that you have to do when to work at a prison or what you said before, to work at McDonald's. So I'm glad to see that. Who'd have known that you actually have to get fingerprinted and pass a background check to work in a hospital? So that's actually pretty good. So Charles Cullen's crimes are a tragic reminder of the potential dangers of healthcare workers who abuse their power and trust. His case has raised important questions about the ethics, accountability, and responsibility of healthcare providers, as well as the need for better safeguards and protections for patients. Now, while his motives and psychology remain a mystery because he really hasn't said, his legacy serves as a cautionary tale for those who work in the healthcare industry. TJ, that is my review and research of The Killer Nurse on Netflix.
It's a fascinating topic. And there's some more things here with this that you didn't really get into. And I'm not trying to throw shade on you or anything like that. It's just you didn't cover it. And I things I think are important. So another thing, an aspect of the Cullen case that is so interesting, and we just mentioned it a minute ago. You know, if this is what you want to do, what better way to do it than to be in the medical field? Well, there may be another aspect to that with Cullen, because Cullen was a slight man. If you see him on the documentary, he's not big. He's very thin, and he's kind of on the shorter scale. So he's not going to overpower many people. And what's interesting to me, what's interesting to me is you have the situation where maybe it is possible that he's just in the nursing field so he can drug people and cover his tracks and everything else. But I think a big part of this is also that he's just a coward. And this is the only way he knew that he'd be able to do this. And what I want to talk about here is, I'm not just saying that to be edgy. If you watch the trial, which is in the documentary, a very brief moment of it anyways, the trial's in it. There's a moment where the judge allows the victims' families to speak individually. And at no point did Cullen ever stop looking at his lap. He didn't look at him. He didn't look up. He didn't acknowledge them. He showed no emotion. And at one point, one of the victim's brothers actually said, "You don't even have the spine to look at me. What a shame." And so I think it's a degree of all those things. I think he was an intelligent man, and he knew if he could become a nurse, he'd get away with doing these things. He knew how to cover his tracks, and he knew this is the only way he's going to be able to do what he wanted because he was a coward. He's just a giant douche, is this man. A waste of skin is what Charles Cullen is.
Yeah, I think if they were anything different, they wouldn't be covered on our show. So
that's true.
Yes.
That's a very good point. Like I'm waiting for the case that we do. Like, actually, outside of this one thing, he was a pretty decent dude.
We haven't found a candidate yet, TJ.
Ernest P. Worrell. He'll be the first one.
Yes.
I think this one got to me. It angered me more than the rest of them because my wife's a nurse, and for one, if you're a doctor or a nurse that listens to this show, and I don't know why you would be, I need to hear what you think about things like this. And there again, there'll come a time where we're going to cover Jack Kevorkian and Dr. Shepard and things of that nature, because Kevorkian might be a two-parter, because there's a whole nother ethics chapter we can do on him. That can of worms he opened with the mercy killings. But again, you would love to think that the medical profession, which they only see you in your most desperate state, and a lot of the times they are the last bastion you have on living or dying. And this is, Cullen himself is not a blight on the medical community. Everyone understands this is a 1 in a million thing that happened. However, the medical cover-up is what I think turns a lot of people off. And believe me, this chain of hospitals in New Jersey that he went to, they would not be the only ones. This very easily could have been in Colorado. It could have been right here in Indiana. It could have been in Illinois. It could have been in Florida. It could have been anywhere. It's not just New Jersey. So this isn't even an indictment on New Jersey. This would have happened anywhere. Money, 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 new facilities, gimme. That's the world. And that kind of thought process is what allows creeps like Charles Cullen to flourish, unfortunately.
Yeah, those hospitals need to be held just as accountable.
Absolutely.
For every one of those murders. So TJ, I know you joked about what your episode is going to be next week, but I know you are serious about what you're doing next week.
Yes.
So let's hear about it. And,
my story next week is a story I didn't even know about until I watched the Netflix documentary. I knew nothing about it. I'd never heard of it. Kind of like when you did Harold Shipman. And actually Danny Ronning, for that matter. You've been very good about keeping the wool over my eyes until you cover the story. This one it was a documentary on Netflix called Evil Genius. And essentially what it is, on the surface, it appears to be a bank heist gone horribly wrong. But then, the investigators, a great team of investigators, really dig their heels in and navigate this whole spider web of nonsense and buffoonery that takes place. And they get to the core of it, and things aren't what they seem. I will say that. This is an interesting story. It's a sad story. It's aggravating. It's angering. It's all those things. And that'll be next week. And then, of course, after that, my episode after Evil Genius, I will end my Netflix block with The Keepers. Will be my last one. So those are the 2 episodes I've got coming up.
Nice. Well, I still don't know what I'm going to do.
I love it
for my next one, but I sure as hell will be looking into Netflix to round out my last Netflix episode, because I think these are interesting, because there is a lot to do when it comes to research, right?
Yes. Because they're not going to cover everything, especially if it's an hour and a half feature. They're not going to cover everything.
Yeah. Now with Evil Genius, it's 4 episodes, so I
Yes.
think that's the nice thing that we will be able to conquer together and kind of ultimately wrap up within an hour show.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I will take some suggestions. I know Amy will probably.
I was just going to say, I love that we're now getting requests.
And I put it right back on her. I think she'd be a great co-host for an episode. So I'm just looking for her to come back and let us know what dates she wants to film with us. So
yes, and my sister is the attorney in North Carolina. She's waiting to get on here. So what's funny is, well, it's not really funny. It just shows you more on this topic of Cullen. The power aspect and the medical field, aura about them, is I've asked her, of course, about the documentary The Staircase, right? Because she actually lives in that town of The Staircase. She won't talk to me about it.
I don't blame her.
She won't. She's like, no. I'm on the phone. It's not like we're in like a cafe somewhere in Raleigh. She's like, I was like talking to her. I'm like, what do you think about the Peterson case, the staircase? No. Okay, very good. Is this an attorney thing? No. Okay. Okay.
Well, if you enjoyed this episode, remember to rate and review us on your podcast source of choice. As always, we look forward to making this an interactive podcast. Feel free to let us know which evildoers you would like to see covered on a future episode by hitting us up on Twitter. TJ, anything you want to leave us with?
Be safe out there. Always watch your back. If something seems weird, it probably is. And we'll see you next weekend.
Yes.
The views expressed on this podcast are ours alone and do not reflect the views of our employers.
Evolution of evil.
I'd have the sleeping pill mixture already prepared. Person would drink it, fall asleep. That's when they would be strangled.
Do you have a boyfriend?
No.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
'Cause I want to know who I'm looking at.
Evil is not spurned. Evil is thought of as a spirit that needs help.
Believe me, if I started murdering people, there'd be none of you left.